Everyone, hopefully, yes, it's saying now the Hangout is live on air, and so welcome to the August Patreon Hangout, where I have a chance monthly to sit down with the people who are kind enough to throw a little something in the tip jar, and we are going to this week be talking about 5 news items. Now I have to slightly apologize to viewers who I mentioned I was going to do videos about with polls as to which stories we should talk about, and I managed 2. And then I had 2 guests come and stay. So I had one guest staying from the 31st until the 3rd, and another one from the 4th until the 9th. And people in real life are just, they take up more time. So I didn't get a chance to do any more. But we do have the results of the first 2 polls and the winners therein. But before we get on to the headlines, I would just like to give a chance to, for my guests to say hello, because they're becoming regulars. You guys are getting to know them as well as me. So Xander, how are things going for you?
Fine. Everything's okay here in the UK for now. It's a nice day outside, so I'd say I'm good as well.
Fantastic. And Matthew, hello, and how are you doing?
I'm good, thank you. How is everyone else in the room? It's a nice day here today.
Excellent. Yeah, I think so far so good. Well, Tom, how are you doing, to answer Matthew's question?
And the very same. It's a beautiful day here in lovely downtown Wheeler. It's been really hot and wet and awful until the last couple days, and now it's just hunky-dory.
And I have to say, here in Cologne, it's a lovely day as well. So it looks like we've got a synchronicity of good weather where we all are. The weather is smiling on us today.
Yeah, it looks like it's going to top out at 85 here in DC today.
Ooh, that's a little warmer than it is here. It's probably in the mid-70s. Well, to get on, let's go ahead and do a test, and I'm going to do the entire screen share save, and then it gives me that place on the screen in the really annoying spot. The first winner of the poll from the videos I made earlier was to talk about Ray Comfort. So I'm going to go ahead and read the piece, and then I'll throw out a topic for discussion, and we can go with that topic, and you guys can bring up other points, but just to get the conversation started. So, from the Christian Times, Ray Comfort declares, "Hell is a very real place," ahead of the Atheist Delusion film premiere. Pastor Ray Comfort insisted that hell surely exists as he promotes his latest apologetic film, The Atheist Delusion, scheduled for release Friday. The founder and CEO of Living Waters sat down for an interview with atheist blogger Hamid Mehta of The Friendly Atheist to answer a number of atheist questions about his upcoming film. The film's trailer showed Comfort talking with several atheists and appeared to have shaken the atheists' convictions about God's non-existence at the end. Mehta asked Comfort whether he thought his film... there we go. The screen went away and then came back. He thought his film, The Atheist Delusion, would be successful, to which Comfort answered by asking Mehta to momentarily consider the Christian leader's position. "I believe with every ounce of my being that hell is a very real place," said Comfort. "I know that is offensive, and it is almost always brings scorn with it. It was Penn Jillette who asked how much we would have to hate someone if we believed that hell was real and didn't warn them." He then added an analogy to present his explanation more simply. Comfort said, "I am not sure that I can adequately answer that. If you were a firefighter trying to save 10 people from death and managed to save 2, is that a success?" The Christian filmmaker and TV co-host of Way of the Master also claimed that he doesn't mind atheists hate watching his movies and videos and picking them apart. His experience of preaching for more than 40 years in the open air and being mocked at, Comfort said, constitutes to the cross he has to carry for being a Christian. And I'll just leave it at that. So what stood out to me in this article is this notion that that hell is a real place. And if it was not a religious belief that he had, if he was saying like the alien, sub-earth dungeon exists, he would be regarded as having a mental illness because his delusions vis-a-vis the facts that we have and can observe are just so contradictory. However, when people frame this in terms of religion, then you can say the most ridiculous things in the world are real, and somehow that's okay. So, who wants to jump in on that first?
I'm looking up some more information on the film itself, and I'm wondering specifically, it says there's a tagline that says atheism would be destroyed with one scientific question. I'm kind of wondering what that one scientific question is, and what kind of people they've asked this question to, because I think they're obviously, or I would imagine they're not of the same caliber as, say, like a Steve or a Bionic Dance, who's been answering these questions for so long that they have them off the top of their head. Because I'm very skeptical as to what he's actually been able to accomplish with the people he's filmed.
Yeah, I'm sure there's a large amount of editing going on there.
Oh, hell yes. That's what he does. If atheists look like, if he's showing the number, oh damn, start over. If he's showing a number of atheists saying, showing that their atheism is shaken by his facile bullshit, yeah, there's got to be, there's selection in who he's showing, and then there's editing of their responses. There's no other way. If I remember correctly, and I may not, probably don't. I think his the question that he was asking, the one scientific question was something on the order of, why is there anything? Why is there something rather than nothing? Basically, who created all this?
I could go on an entire diatribe about what the answer to that question is.
Absolutely. It's like I say, it's facile. He just, and he's been shown all those arguments you were going to talk about, all the arguments from the from Krauss and Hawking and all that, and he knows those answers. He just doesn't buy it, and he falls back to, well, it's a creation, has to be a creator. I'm not sure that's a question, but that's what I remember reading one time about this amazing question in the film.
For me, I'm just going to jump in here to say that whenever I've heard people, like I've seen it on debate boards and also on YouTube occasionally, they'll make the assertion that something can't come from nothing.
Mm-hmm.
And then my question back to them would be, well, -3 is a thing. Like you can owe the bank $3, and you can have $3, and so if you give the $3 you have to the bank, where your account is -3, what is your account now? It's 0. So obviously you get -3 and 3 out of 0. You can get an infinite number of things out of 0. You just need a positive and a negative to balance out. And this concept of like more of a philosophical nothing rather than a practical and physics-based notion of nothingness, which is scientific and very precise. Not to say that philosophical concepts aren't, but at least there's a grounding in observable reality that we can see. I never really understood why they thought that was somehow a devastating question if they could do math.
Well, if you can indulge me 30 seconds I'll shorten my diatribe a little bit. The question presupposes that nothing is the default position of the universe. Why do we assume that nothing is the default? So, I mean, something may be the default. We have no clue. We don't know that yet. And of course, we're able to say, I don't know. The second thing I wanted to say is look up the zero energy universe hypothesis, which basically says that when inflation started, that if you were to calculate the sum total of the energy of the universe, using the mass energy equation and stuff like that, using all the gravity and the dark energy and all that other stuff, that the sum total of the universe is 0.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. So, again, if you were to smash everything back together again, it would all cancel each other out. So our universe is, if this hypothesis holds any water, and I'm not saying it does, but it's a compelling idea to make you think outside this default of nothing box.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it was Lawrence Krauss said something about, people always complain about his definition of nothing actually being something, and he said, from his understanding of it, which is pretty good, the religious and philosophical arguments against about what nothing is that which physics can't quite explain yet. That is the opposite of whatever physics says is nothing. So it's a definitional problem in some ways, and the physicists, the cosmologists, are using nothing in a vastly different way than this absolute lack of anything whatsoever that the philosophical and religious folks are trying to use. And so the conversations go past each other is basically it.
It sounds like... I'm sorry about that.
No, go ahead.
I was just going to say real quick, that sounds like the difference between the colloquial use of the word theory and the scientific use of the word theory.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
Very much so. Xander, what are your thoughts on all of this?
Sorry, I just spent about 5 minutes looking up more about this Ray Comfort guy, and I got on a whole diatribe about bananas. So.
Oh yes.
Banana man. Banana man.
Yeah. He's not really a good researcher in discovering that yeah, bananas as we have them today were, you know, tampered with by humans in order to make them into what they are, and that's, you know, God didn't design it to fit perfectly in the human hand or to have a Ziploc opener.
Yeah.
Yeah, what do you guys think about this idea that him having, I mean, he really lives in a world, his perception of reality is one in which hell is a real thing. And of course, in that situation, one would say it's rational insofar as it makes sense that you're trying to save people, but really the lacking of questioning of the very premise to begin with seems to me like that is the problem of religious indoctrination from childhood, because you have these beliefs fed to you before you have critical thinking skills. And of course, hell is, as we've discussed before, is something that we're associating with terror as a sort of a societal internal regulator, you know, a way for us to punish people or threaten people when you can't actually do anything about, like, they're masturbating, you know, so that you threaten them with hell. Yeah, I think that's, if it was, again, anything other than a religious belief, then we would question, I think, the person's perception of reality.
If Kristi will allow me to make a plug here, I don't know if anyone watches the Theremin Trees YouTube channel, but they just came out with a great video just a couple days ago about young indoctrination. I'm pasting the link here in the chat window.
Great. Oh yeah, and to everyone watching, all of the links that Matthew is providing, I will copy and paste into the description box after the Hangout, so you guys can see what he's been looking at as well.
Thank you. But yeah, it's a 20-some minute video, but it goes through the idea of comparing political indoctrination with religious indoctrination, and if you're willing to open your mind to it, it shows you what you could be doing to your children by instilling this idea of an almighty God, instilling the idea of an eternal hellfire, if that's what your religious beliefs are. I realize it's difficult for someone who's inside the religion, you know, as I once was, to see outside that box. But if you can just see it for what it truly is, that you're putting in information into a mind that doesn't have a reasoning filter.
Yeah. Yeah, I haven't seen that one. I saw it on my recommended list or my subscription list, but I didn't get a chance to look at it. But I've seen earlier ones of his, and I would recommend his other videos of his on the same kind of topic. He's brilliant at showing how people can make very firm and absolute beliefs out of things that normally, that if left to themselves in a free society, they'd never even consider. But with a little help from their family and friends and the society, people can be made to do pretty much anything, to believe pretty much anything, and then to act out of that. So if this latest one is like that, I'm in for 2 or 3 watchings.
Yeah, I think it's great to plug really good videos. So yes, thumbs up. And also, I'm gonna put out a plug for a video that I just added to my Get Smarter watch or Get Smarter recommended videos list. Even though I'm not still doing the series because of time constraints, I'm still like adding videos to the list. But the question was on the value of knowledge. and was looking at the problem of I think it's called the Meno problem, which is if, let's say, you have a strong belief about something and you act on it, and it turns out that your strong belief happened to be right, so you got the outcome you wanted. Like you are driving to a place and you strongly believe the restaurant that you're driving to will be open, and it is. Then is that any different from actually calling them up before you leave the house to make sure that they're open and going and arriving there? And what is it about knowledge that is different from a firm belief in terms of its truth value or other things? So yeah, that's another kind of nerdy video that I would recommend for people who are looking for good content on YouTube.
Yeah, I think I sent you a link to a video on that. I don't know if it's a big think or a philosophy one, but it was about the idea of the nature of truth and how, you know, most people talk about it in terms of justified true belief.
Yeah.
And did you happen to take a look at that?
I think I've seen that one, yeah, and that it's not as
Okay.
straightforward as a justified true belief.
Right. That you can, you know, the question really is, can you, you know, if you're justified in your belief, and if it happens to be true, and you believe it, does that mean that you're necessarily that it necessarily was true in some kind of absolute sense, and that there is an odd little, can't remember the name of it, an odd little out that where you know it might be sort of justified in your experience, and it might turn out to be true, but it really wasn't. I'm screwing this up.
That's okay. They're philosophical concepts, so they're really complicated and layered and tricky. So yes.
Yeah.
But basically,
Yeah.
you can I think the point is that even if you have you can tick all the boxes for a justified true belief, the person was able to work out a thought experiment where even that justified true belief would be wrong.
Right.
Because of maybe like the clock had stopped when you looked at the time, and it was all these kinds of things. So yeah, I think the thing about skeptics, good proper skeptics, is that we mostly are aware of the flaws in our knowledge, and therefore we don't treat it with big T truth claims.
There you go. I knew you'd rescue me.
No worries. Xander too. I don't know if you've had more musings besides bananas as this conversation's going on that you want to.
No, nothing 100% solid at the moment.
Okay. Well, with that, I think you guys are ready to move on to the second winner of the poll.
Oh, why not?
All right. So let me get back to the screen share option here. And we can look at this. It's actually a little bit dated. I'm not sure why it showed up in my feed again, but I thought the topic itself was interesting. So this comes from the Richard Dawkins Foundation for Science and Reason. It's back from 2012, but it was the result of a poll conducted by Ipsos Mori, and they were examining UK Christians and their attitudes on a range of issues from gay rights to religion and public life. And according to the results of the survey, even people who listed themselves as Christians for the purposes of the census held highly secular beliefs. So 3/4, or 74%, strongly agreed or tend to agree that religion should not have special influence on public policy, whereas only 1 in 8, or 12%, thought that it should. 2% of respondents disagreed with the statement that the law should apply to everyone equally, regardless of their religious beliefs personally, with 92% supporting that statement. More people opposed than supported the idea of the UK having an official state religion, with nearly half, 46%, against, and only a third, or 32%, in favor. The same pattern was repeated for questions being reserved for Church of England bishops in the House of Lords. 32% of respondents opposed that idea, that what is going on, with only 25% in favor. And there is also overwhelming support in that poll for religion being a private, not a public matter. When asked how strongly they supported the statement that the government should not interfere in religion, 79% strongly agreed or tend to agree, with only 8% strongly disagreeing or tending to disagree. Interestingly, I think, too, for Americans, is the role of religion in the state. So I'll read this out. 4 in 10 Christians, 39%, opposed the costs of hospital chaplains. Where was that word coming from? Hospital chaplains being met from NHS budgets, rather than by the chaplain's religious organization, with only a third, or 32%, happy for the NHS to pay. And 8 out of 10, or 78%, say Christianity would have no or not very much influence on how they voted in the general elections, with only 16% saying it would influence them a great deal, or 4% who said it would, 4% said it would influence them a great deal, and 12% said a fair amount. So yeah, I thought that we're going to be a bit more international in our stories today. So talking about, the Christianity holding a special place in secular governments. Anyone want to, Xander, I'm going to pick on you. Do those numbers surprise you?
Not really. I remember, I don't know if it was actually on this chat a few months ago, talking about the same question asked, how much influence Christianity would have in the general elections. I'm a little surprised that it's for, let's say, let's say 16% say that Christianity would have an effect in the general elections. Do we know what it was for?
I think it was on their personal vote. On their personal vote, it would have an influence. And there is a fringe Christian party that runs in a few constituencies who want to, kind of guide Britain by the Bible.
What was it in America now? I remember looking at these stats months ago. I'm fairly sure it was this. It was an article describing these same questions asked in America.
I would imagine the number is much higher.
Yeah, but it's going down. That's the main thing that I wanted to make about it. My favourite thing about this article is the questions that directly oppose the religion in itself. Like 62. No, hold on. There we go. 59% Christians support the legalization of assisted suicide, which isn't that supposed to be a direct contradiction to their religion in general? Isn't suicide a
sin?
Yeah, essentially.
It's a mortal sin, actually.
If you're Catholic. They don't have venial sins and mortal sins and the rest of the Protestant things.
Well, Anglican Church also talks about that too. So
yeah, I don't know how they are on the venial and mortal distinction there. So fair play. I think it's when we talk about there's too often an overgeneralization, and I will admit to this as well, that there's discussion about Christians who are trying to influence government, and that tends to then ignore those Christians who are pro-secular. And basically, who would be our ally on issues of making sure that, people don't have to swear on a Bible to testify, or not that you have to do that anymore, but just as like a random example that I'm pulling out of the air. And we shouldn't always be, again, I'm trying to do a bit better too about some Christians or fundamentalist Christians to try to make sure that you don't alienate people who could be your allies on specific issues. And it does seem that there's a lot of, say, cultural Christianity in the UK rather than, really kind of hardcore proselytizing in your face.
It's very wishy-washy over here.
Yes, but it's still disproportionately given credence by the Conservative government. I mean, there have been several times that they try to make the case that Britain is a Christian country, or you have people who support the Conservatives say that Britain is a Christian country. Like, nah, if you look at the demographics, not so much.
Maybe it's a vote that's significant enough that they're trying to grab.
Yes, possibly, and that sort of rally around the, grab your Bible and your flag, I guess, sort of equivalent. But it is, I think, for people who are used to, who are probably a bit more on the conservative side, this idea of what Britain is, and, for God and country, or for, God and Queen and country, that notion of the Christianity being bound up in it. I wonder if there are some people who just couldn't think of the British government without the Church of England. They do have seats in the Lords. They're involved with the coronation. They're really ubiquitous in terms of their ritualistic representation in what is ostensibly a democracy.
I'm wondering, Xander, maybe Kristi, do you have any sense of whether the more religious Christians in Britain are tend to be more the ones that are worried about Muslim and other immigration?
Oh, that's interesting.
I'm just curious. It just I don't know.
I've seen. No, not really. All the groups or the examples I've seen of people worried about immigration are just. It's very sporadic. Like I haven't actually seen any real patterns with it. It just seems to be small groups out of every group that seem to be worried about immigration more than anything else.
Yeah, I think that in the Conservative Party in the UK, you get that party where both immigration is a concern and Christianity as part of Britain's identity are both part of the party, but I don't think that they intersect a lot in terms of ideology.
Yeah.
My impression is generally that on the Conservative side, not the UKIP side of things, but on the Conservative side, there tends to be more of that sort of like talk about it in a way that's inoffensive and talk about the problems on a more macro scale rather than making it personal and like, you know, kind of ugly. And there isn't, I think there are probably obviously elements within British society, you know, the EDL that would look at Christianity as probably part of British identity. But I think in the Conservative Party, those two, the anti-immigration bits and the sort of suspicion of people coming, well, I don't know, there's also just an anti-immigration thing, and a lot of it was aimed at Poles and other Eastern Europeans. So it's kind of a complicated, immigration doesn't equal terrorism as much as like Mexican issues with immigration or perception of Mexicans when it's really just, you know, people from south of Texas. Any of them are called Mexican for the purposes of the discussion. Yeah, but I don't know that the Islamophobia is really, I don't see that being given a lot of overt voice in the Conservative Party. I don't know if Xander has any examples. I mean, there might be the one-off jerk, but generally I think the party wants its image to not be anti-Muslim.
Oh yeah, in general, they try not to piss anyone off. But they do anyway, it's fine.
Yeah.
I was wondering about Tommy Robinson. Is he religious? Because he comes up all the time when I'm thinking, you know, when I'm hearing about the immigration stuff and leaving EU for that reason.
I'm not quite sure about Tommy Robinson.
Okay, right.
Yeah, I think we'd have to go to like Wikipedia and try to find like some sort of source information.
Like,
go ahead.
I was just going to say he doesn't seem to make enough noise. Like I've never really heard of him or his activism or anything like that.
Okay.
Yeah.
He's got a bigger footprint over in the States than he does there for recognizable assholes.
Yeah.
All right. So we're ready to move on now. These the next story was not voted upon, but we're gonna take a look at it anyway. And then so these are just my picks, things that I thought would be a little bit interesting and sometimes maybe entertaining to talk about. Okay. And the next one up is, I saw this on my Facebook feed today. Christian pastor, men rule over women at home, and I'll arm wrestle any woman here who disagrees. Now, before I start, I will totally poison the well that Pastor Steven Anderson was the piece of shit who had his video removed from YouTube after the massacre in the gay club in Orlando. Yeah. For being a vile piece of shit. So before we go into that, I just want to make sure that everyone is aware of how little this guy has credibility, but we should still feel free to laugh at him. So in a recent sermon, Pastor Steve Anderson proclaimed that the husband's the head of the wife, then laughed off criticism that he was misogynistic because he continued, "It's like a new word," and he wasn't interested in jumping in on some trendy bandwagon. He, quote, "I get an email every day calling me misogynistic. What a stupid word. That is like a new word. I never heard that when I was a kid. I didn't hear that. Did you hear that growing up? See, I don't go with all your trendy little words and your trendy little concepts. You know, people have been doing it my way for the last 6,000 years. In all cultures, pretty much in all nations of the world. And it's worked out great for a lot of people." Anderson doesn't get the problem with misogyny because things have worked out great for a lot of people, which is true. Men are doing just fine. And misogynistic isn't a new word. It's actually from the mid-17th century. saying you've never heard of it growing up as if that's an argument for why this isn't a big deal is like saying there's no sexual harassment at Fox News Channel because Roger Ailes has always been nice to you. Just because you're not the victim of it and people don't always talk about it in public doesn't mean it may not be happening. Anderson continued, but all of a sudden we're supposed to get on this trendy little, I'm not going to read out his homophobic slur, type of a relationship where, you know, my wife and I are supposed to dress the same, act the same, look the same, talk the same, live the same lifestyle, have the same authority. Not so subtle homophobic slur aside, gender equality doesn't mean men and women have to do everything the same way. We have the same opportunities, yes, but no one's going to force Anderson to dress like his wife as a way to promote feminism. I want to tell Anderson to get a dictionary and look up the word misogyny so he doesn't keep misrepresenting it. But I'm pretty sure he has rules against opening up a second book. Anderson went on to argue women who accept their biblical roles love it. Honestly, women are just as happy in this lifestyle as men. When there's a proper lifestyle, when the husband is the leader, because here's the thing, women are not wired to want to be in charge and rule over a man. It goes against the grain to be with them to be the boss and to make all the decisions. They'd love to be married to a strong man. Women don't want a weakling. So I'll just stop there, and we can have a little chat.
Thank you.
There is so much wrong with this article. I don't even know where to begin.
Yeah, it's, oh man, I was getting a headache.
This would be great fodder for if you were playing, you know, logical fallacy bingo, because he makes so many mistakes. Like
yeah, there you go. A video, and do a video with his video, and every time he has a logical fallacy, have a bell go off, and then explain what the fallacy is behind him.
Yeah.
It'd be a very dangerous drinking game, though.
Well, he does all these straw man things, like talking about how he and his wife need to dress the same and talk the same. It's like, no, that's not what we're saying. He makes an appeal to tradition. You know, 6,000 years of tradition. That doesn't mean it's right.
Yeah.
We can do things wrong for 6,000 years. And then the slurs and everything else that goes on in this article. I just have, this leaves me with one question. Are there any women in this congregation?
Yes.
Sadly, I think there are. I don't know how much they do pan in the audience in there, but yeah, unfortunately there are women who buy into this narrative because it's been put in their head since birth.
Mm-hmm.
And this idea that women don't want to be the boss and don't want to make decisions, like, wow. I've had a career now for 20 years, and I know plenty of women who did an amazing job as bosses. I know some who sucked, but that's the same way with the male bosses. So I don't understand where he's going with this, where he got these ideas. You know, I can't imagine what he's going to say when Hillary Clinton becomes president. What is his response going to be on January 20th? And
heads will be exploding all over.
Yeah. And what makes this worse is that I've been inside of a highly misogynistic religion where the men were the only ones allowed to make decisions in the congregation. The men were the only ones that went up and gave talks. The men were the only ones who did any kind of assignment. And the women just kind of sat there. And I remember hearing women say, "Oh, I'm glad I don't have to do all of that." And it was just like, when I look back on it, okay. Are you glad just because you're lazy? Are you glad because you don't want to have to do any of this? Are you glad because that's what you're told to be? And I think in a lot of cases in these situations, a lot of people are quote unquote happy with it because they're told to be happy with it.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the role God gave for you. Of course you should be happy about it because it's the role God gave for you. So for you to question your role is to question God, and who are you to question God? Basically. So I'm sorry I interrupted somebody. Was that you, Xander?
I just said it's more of that indoctrination stuff from the previous article.
Yeah.
It makes me sick though how people rationalise how the female how they try to rationalise that the women in that relationship have it better off than the men because they're not supposed to do these things. Oh, you don't need to stress out about this stuff. You have it much better than we do. Ugh, it just, grinds my gears.
Yeah.
I think when we did that group response that I kind of organized, and I'm doing a lot of the editing on, which is why I don't always appear in it, but for the SJW questions, even though we don't necessarily consider ourselves SJW, but the question about time being a linear process, and why do you keep talking about the past impacting the present, and because people like this kid, these attitudes, when Pastor Steve Anderson was a child in the 50s and 60s, those values were basically put into his head as being unquestionable truths. And he carries those values with him into the future. Now we're in the 21st century. And he's still holding to the values that he was raised with, 40, 50 years ago. And if that's the case, then obviously the past impacts on the present and how people see people in the present time. Because you don't just walk through a door and because it's a new day, you forget everything that's happened to you. And these, especially religious institutions, are really all built around an undefensible notion of male power. And you try to unpack where is the justification for that male power, and other than because penis, there really isn't any good. There's no reason why men should default be the leaders and hold authority over everybody else, except if you want to promote patriarchy.
One of the things that annoys me in this article, I can't remember if you actually read it out, was, now, first off, before I say this, am I allowed, Kristi, am I allowed to call you a woman? Am I allowed to call you a feminist?
Yes, you have my permission.
So, and then his article says, even the feminist women, deep down, they're like, please rule over me, please be my leader. And my question for you, Kristi, as the female member of this group, have you ever in your life felt that way? Because that feels like the Disney princess mentality to me. And I was just wondering, has that ever been in your conception, in your worldview?
Yeah, I've never sort of in any of my relationships turned to the man I was with and say, would you please just make all the decisions for me and take all of my money and just tell me what to do every part of the day, and instead of doing anything that I find fulfilling, I will just focus on satisfying your needs and your happiness, because that is what I live to do. I'm here to serve. Yeah, and that's never happened, because I think that the best kind of relationship is one where the two people make each other more fulfilled and bring out things in each other that they might not have had the courage to bring out or seen in themselves. So my preferred notion of relationship is one that empowers both people, and it not makes one utterly subservient to the other.
So then the next question is, what does arm wrestling have anything to do with this? I want to see an atheist Olympian come back, go to his church, and arm wrestle him and see what he says after that.
Well, I think it really sums up the whole idea is, if you don't get in line, woman, I'm going to thump you. It really comes down to brute force and violence in order to force people to comply with the structure they want you to comply with.
Sexual dimorphism. It's almost like it's not just for Thunderfoot anymore.
Yes. Yeah, I'm a male, and I'm therefore inherently bigger than you, and I can smack you around, and that means I'm right.
I know any number of women who could take him in
he's not a big guy.
Arm wrestling or boxing or a knife fight. I don't think he's all that tough. I don't think he's that old either. I think he's probably around my son's age, in the 40s, maybe about your age, in his 40s. I don't think he doesn't strike me as somebody who grew up. I mean, his mental faculties sound like they came
madmen. Yeah, you're right. He's probably late 60s, early 70s.
Yeah, I don't think he's that old. I think I saw his wife and maybe a child, and they're pretty young.
Yeah, I think what I was thinking of, and thank you for correcting me, was more his value system was pre-sexual revolution.
I think he's pre-American Revolution.
Yeah, so when people want to say that patriarchy isn't a real thing and that there isn't any problem with feminism in the West, there you go. Just point him at the arm wrestling Steve Anderson, who thinks that if he's bigger and stronger than a woman, that somehow makes him factually correct, which makes no sense to anyone who thinks about it long enough.
Yeah, it's a threat. Go ahead. I'm sorry.
Sorry, I just wanted to ask, what audience does he have? Who is he saying this to, and how many of them are actually listening to this?
They do the recordings in his church. And I don't think in the recordings you get to see the size of the audience, but you do hear people agreeing with him from the audience. So there are, you know, a handful of people there at least.
Oh yeah, I've seen. I looked up his church, and it's not a mega church, but he's probably got several hundred congregants in any given service, and I don't know. He's spawned at least one and maybe two others that I know of, congregations. These two other guys that actually, on the Pulse nightclub thing, you said were, there you go, Faithful Word Baptist Church. Thanks, Matt. Matthew, anyway. He's spawned two others, Jimenez, I think, and another guy. Who've also been on the tube, and I think one of the guys had like a storefront church, and he got evicted because of that. So I mean, there are people like him out there.
Yeah, I think the thing is that he gets noticed because he puts his stuff up on YouTube. But most of the pastors in these smaller communities, or you know, just out in the middle of nowhere, or even like fringe churches in urban areas, they're not recording their crazy stuff about arm wrestling women. Yeah, we just don't see them because they're not recording themselves. Yeah. I
just was Googling the pastor here, and the first story that comes up is a Raw story that says, Bill the Gays pastor has a pulpit-stomping meltdown after he's booted from online fundraising. So he becomes fodder for the secular movement with probably every word he says.
Yes.
Oh, and if we're doing a show of shout-outs, then I definitely want to shout out Poisoning the Well, when they did a spoof of his video, another one where he's going after women. And I think it's like it has something to do with feminism or women in the title. Go watch all of their videos anyway, because they're all really good. But they do a great takedown of this guy because he has in the past done said crazy things as well. If I remember at the end of the video, I'll put a link to that too in the description box. So.
Yeah, he's absolutely consistent. I mean, his King James version, Word of God, 6,000 years, creation, hates fags and women, and anybody who's really not him.
Anything that upsets the biblical order.
Yeah.
Yep. American Christians. They're pretty terrifying. Yeah. I was also again. I have more ideas for videos than I have time to make videos, but I was thinking about making a spoof video as to asking whether or not Donald Trump was the Antichrist, because he's like the whole thing about he's going to be a salesman and people are going to flock to him and he's going to be a false prophet, and all these and the deals he's making with the various powers and all that. And I thought it would be kind of funny, but I don't have time to live my life, let alone make all the videos that I have ideas for.
Yeah, I think if you wait a month, it'll probably be irrelevant anyway. I'm reasonably certain he's going to drop out when he gets when it's very clear he can't win, and he's actually going to be challenged to back stuff up and debate people. I mean, he's already backing out of debates. He's doubling down on insanity, and my biggest fear about Donald Trump is not that he'll win, because I don't think that's possible, but my biggest fear is that he'll drop out too soon, and the Republicans will have a chance to put somebody else in who is less obviously hated and probably less known than Hillary, and so all the anti-Hillary stuff will kick back in for a lot of her reluctant supporters, and they might go to a Paul Ryan or something like that, somebody who's not as well known, and there's not enough time to make him known to the country as the asshole that he is.
Yeah,
So,
I've stopped trying. I mean, I think that's a possible scenario. I still think it's pretty highly unlikely, just because of Donald Trump's ego. But who knows? You know, with Donald Trump, this is it. You can't predict him anymore.
yeah.
But it is like, you know, I've talked about how political events are a little bit like cosmological events in that they happen over a very long period of time. And if you think about, you know, the last 12 months, if you were to put a timeline of all of the Donald Trump explosions in the media and then run it, you know, and then like, well, I guess there are explosions that are happening inside of a spaceship, which is called, you know, Republican Party, and it's barely out of control, and things are flying off of it now. Yeah, it's the party is literally just breaking apart before our eyes, in the same way that sort of, you know, like two, you know, like arms of a universe will collide and create ripple effects. So yeah, it's it's kind of a scary time. I mean, I've never watched the destruction of a political party in modern, you know, in American history before in real time. So we'll see where they end up with after November.
Well, it happened to the Whigs before Lincoln got elected, so it very well could end up at that same side of the aisle, right in our lifetime. Which I would love to see the destruction of the current two-party system, but we'll see what happens.
Yeah, nothing prevents us from having more than three parties, other than the fact that there is this sort of natural equilibrium that if you have, you know, majority winner take all, that you tend to get two-party systems. Right. But if you had a legitimate, like, sort of moderate party, because I think the Republican Party is breaking up into two separate parties. I don't think the Democratic Party is quite on the same level of having a left wing willing to break away, and the Green Party is not that alternative. Just like from a political science point of view, it's just like it's not big enough to play that kind of role. You'd have to have mass migration, and the Green Party's already there. So, but yeah, you could in theory have a kind of a coalition system in the House of different factions, you know, coming together. We've never seen that. But with you know, maybe it is a sort of post-economic crash where the divisions between the populists part of the country and the establishment parts of the country within the two-party system really just can't coexist without constant, you know, breaking apart now. We'll have to see. But this is getting way off topic. But before I wrap that bit up, anyone else want to jump in on the Trump tangent?
I like to jump on the Trump, but that's a different, probably a different sense of the terms.
Yeah, that's a different video altogether. Like when we play wrestling, and yeah, we all just sort of like, you know, sledgehammer him or whatever the various wrestling moves are called. I'm not a wrestling fan, obviously. So, okay, so
maybe we could have Trump arm wrestle Steve.
Yes.
That would be funny.
So are you guys seeing my screen?
Mm-hmm.
Excellent. So the next one is Canada. Look at this. We are so international this week. So this is from The Rebel asking, do we have freedom from religion in Canada? Atheist fired for refusing to enter faith-based AA program. Freedom of religion is a fundamental right in Canada, written into the Constitution. As a protected right, believers have freedom to assemble without limitation and interference. Neither the government nor anyone else can force an individual to practice a certain religion. Enter Byron Wood, a nurse with a substance abuse issue. After being admitted to hospital and diagnosed, his license was suspended by the College of Registered Nurses of British Columbia. His employer, Vancouver Coastal Health, and BC Nurses Unions were notified and an assessment was required. The doctor recommended an Alcoholics Anonymous program in Ontario, and this is where the problems arose. Among other complaints, Wood objected that since he's an atheist and AA is a faith-based program, he felt being forced into a religious program was a violation of his rights, and so he offered alternatives, but his requests were refused. He was told all addiction doctors available through Vancouver Coastal Health recommended AA, and there were no other options. After refusing to enter a religiously based program, he was fired. Mr. Wood filed a complaint with the BC Human Rights Tribunal, and they've agreed to review his complaint. His other complaints aside, this is a no-brainer. The Constitution guarantees that people have the right to practice or not practice religion freely in Canada.
Okay, this is sort of my house. My master's is in addictions counseling, and I know I'm shocked that in Canada they can go from BC to Ontario very different parts of the country and not be able to find a non-religious or non-AA based addictions program, that is horseshit. There's a lot of horseshit in this. There's just, oh man, talk about data driven. The AA 12-step kind of program was sort of the state of the art for a very long time, basically because nobody else was playing in the system. And when I was going to grad school in the mid to late 80s, there had already been a long period of time of increasing secular counseling, not based on the 12 steps at all, but based on individualized services to people, counseling in various options for substance use, all the way from responsible use to to no use at all. I spent some time in Scotland, and maybe Xander can speak to this down in the south, but the addictions program in Scotland was entirely social services based. There was very, very little that I found about AA, although maybe I don't know much about that side of it. But all the addictions counseling I've learned about from at least in Scotland was entirely look at the individual, see what they need, support them at every level, and give them counseling to have them achieve their goals around chemical use and their life. And in this country, there's also a very it's not as strong as AA because not that many people know about it, but there are much, much better outcomes from individualized therapy programs than this one-size-fits-all quasi-religious thing. So, again, my head hurts.
Yeah, does anyone else want to come in on that?
I will have another plug for this, actually. I don't know how many of you agree with Penn and Teller's bullshit, but they did an episode specifically on 12-step programs and how basically it was essentially formed from a religious cult perspective.
Yeah.
And it was the 12-step. I remember this specifically. The guy who invented the 12-step program got the 12 steps from a vision from God.
Right. Okay.
Yeah. And the stats for AA as well. This would probably be my main argument against AA is that they showed the stats of successful. I want to call them applicants because I can't think of another word. It was 5% success in AA and 5% success of getting off alcohol outside of AA. So I don't know if we could technically say that they're the same 5% people regardless, but it's essentially a non-start. It's basically almost useless.
It doesn't even have a placebo effect.
No.
Yeah. The thing is that for a lot of people, it does seem to work, but there are an awful lot of alcoholics. So when you say a lot of people get off the sauce or off the drugs on AA, that number might be right, but the percentage is not, like you say. Percentages, in fact, it's been so long. It's been 20 years since I was up on the numbers on this, but I do remember the outcomes from programs that individualized services to the and gave a broad range of services, family therapy, employment counseling, financial support, all that kind of stuff, were higher. Significantly higher than the AA outcomes, and yet judges seem to only know, judges and employers and things like that seem only to be aware of AA.
Well, it's successful branding. It's like Kleenex.
Yeah.
Or Q-tips. name brand products, whatever. Yeah. Durex.
Yeah, there's Xander. I'm not sure about the. I haven't heard the vision thing, although that would not surprise me. But it did grow out of a group or religious philosophy. I think the Oxford group or the Oxford philosophy. I don't think it was Oxford, England, although it might have been. But it was a religious way of looking at things that had to do with surrender to the higher power for all of your, surrender and then cleanse yourself of, of all the evil that you've accumulated over your lifetime by actions as well as words. So, anyway.
No, I think that definitely seems to fit with what I'm not an expert on AA, to be honest. Like, I've learned, so most of what I know about it is through television, to be honest. So I'm not saying I'm an expert in any way, but in terms of how it's portrayed, and I think the basic philosophy, this sort of like giving over and giving up, not giving up as in surrendering your life, but like handing your problems over to something bigger than yourself or something outside yourself. And that's very much the difference, I think, between people who become atheists and people who don't. I mean, people who are religious who feel very overwhelmed, and it's that kind of like having an imaginary friend who will just tell you everything is going to be okay. And it's like unloading to your mom when you were a kid, or talking to your dad and having him comfort you, or your partner. And it's kind of just creating an invisible friend because you don't feel you can handle it on your own. And what my biggest problem with that is that you are handling it on your own. You're just giving the credit to this other thing. Yeah. And by giving the credit to the other thing, you're never really acknowledging the work and progress you are making and taking pride in that and valuing it, not because someone let you do it or you got through it with the help of someone else, but because it was really freaking hard and you lived through it and you did it, and that should be celebrated.
Absolutely. One of the things that I've seen that bothers me the most about AA is the dependence that it fosters on so many people. So many AA people have come to believe, and to be fair, it's because a lot of the people in the program tell you it's this way, that if you leave AA, if you're successful at not drinking when you're in AA, and if you leave AA, you're probably going to go back right to drinking. And also, if you have one drink after you've been sober for any length of time, years, decades, if you have one drink, you're right back in it, absolutely as bad as it used to be. And so you have to stay with the program, and in that way, it's very much like religion. And a lot of people who get out of drinking, I for one, I got sober on AA. And that was, that was very useful. But I know a lot of people. But after 2 years or so of occasionally going and feeling supported, I realized I didn't need that anymore. And I've lived my life since then without that need to depend on this other bunch of folks. That was very much like my leaving religion. I don't need that. I can do things on my own. So I think I just met a guy went to church with when I was a kid. He's been sober in AA for 28 years, and he still goes to meetings several times a week, sometimes every day. And it's good that his life is not as bad as it used to be, but I think there's a serious amount of freedom and self-respect that he's giving up because he thinks it's this other thing that's doing it for him, and he doesn't take the credit for all the work he did himself.
Yeah, I think because if you're taking the credit for yourself, then you can walk away from the group and say, I feel confident in my ability to do this because I'm the one doing it. But if they give you the idea that it's the group that's really keeping you from drinking, it's like it's Dumbo and the magic feather. except the magic feather is your time and efforts and whatever else that you're investing in AA. And maybe some of it is positive in that you're, becoming a sponsor for other people, or you're meeting people who need you. But that still should be a choice you should feel able to make on your own, to come in as a helper, not to always come in as the addict and always be wearing the role of addict every time you're in that room, forever and ever and ever.
Right. And the thing is that, yes, you always throughout your life are going to need a support system of some sort. But that support system doesn't have to be one support system forever. You can develop other support systems outside of that are more flexible, that go with you, that change over time, that will accept you as you are. That will, help you course correct if you screw up. They aren't going to get all up in your business if you have a drink, and it doesn't go past that. I don't know. I'm sorry I blabbered on here, but that's one of those things. This is one of those areas that I feel very, very strongly about. That AA does wonderful work. And it takes way too much credit and takes away too much individual responsibility in many cases.
I'm perfectly happy. This is why we have the chat. So I don't want to do all the talking. I do all the talking in all my videos, you guys. Yeah. Before we move on to the last story, does anyone else want to get on the Canadian, question about freedom of religion and freedom from religion? Matthew, not you? You're all right? Okay, all right.
Yep.
Well, then
you
I'll
two
go over.
have all the knowledge, and I'll step back on that one. So let's move on to the next one.
All right, so Xander, if you're not speaking up, I'm just going to ride right over you.
No, it's not free.
Okay, so this is my one. I thought it was interesting. I'll give my thoughts afterwards, but in Germany, secular confirmation thrives again. Hamburg, Germany. In late 1945, after the end of the Second World War, Kurt Newman began digging in his garden. Under the soil, a bunch of documents and photos had lain in repose for 8 years. He scrubbed off the dirt and unspooled the documents from the protective oil paper. He had survived the war, and so had the founding papers of the city's anti-religion secularist movement. His son, Conny Newman, is now the head of the Hamburg branch of the Jugendweihe Deutschland, a body rooted in a secularist approach. The documents, hidden during Nazi rule, helped resume the tradition of Jugendweihe, a confirmation ceremony without religion. It has been 125 years since this group of humanist thinkers established itself in the port city, and in an increasingly religious country, the tradition it promoted is undergoing a rediscovery. In April, 350 teenagers in Hamburg dressed up and went to the ceremony, where they were pronounced as having graduated into the Jugendweihe. This was about 50 more than the previous year, and more than triple than those who went through the process 10 years ago. Milan Vestlane, a 15-year-old from North Rhine-Westphalia, said it was something he wanted to do when he saw his friends having a Christian confirmation. To do this in a group with others and feel that I'm a grown-up now was a good feeling, he said. His mother, Elizabeth, added, it was a step for him toward being a grown-up, taking responsibility, learning things. The Jugendweihe isn't anti-church or a lifelong membership body, but rather a one-time event in a young person's life. Children are usually aged 14 to 18 when they sign up, and the process involves 20 weeks of classes before they formally graduate. The teens are taken on field trips and museum visits, taught ethics and social niceties, and given a textbook covering the main topics: ethics, current affairs, and climate change. The ones who come are interested in further educating themselves on the secular aspects of life, Newman said. That doesn't mean they aren't That doesn't mean they aren't taught about religion. It's just one item in the curriculum, alongside the Constitution, tolerance, and evolution. The updated textbook for the Jugendweihe Deutschland now contains chapters on the incomplete separation between church and state in Germany, the rise of right-wing fascism, and modern media, human rights, and the way to approach living. That is what they learn at our meetings, Newman said. Around 50,000 children a year go across the country go through the process, organized by various secular humanist groups, Newman said. The lion's share, about 37,000 children, do it with Jugendweihe Deutschland, an increase of 900 over last year. Though the total is less than at the peak times of the movement during communist East German times, the recent increase comes with membership decline in Germany's Lutheran Church. Begun more than 150 years ago, the Jugendweihe is a way to educate young people outside a religious tradition, a movement that faced persecution by the Nazis. Later, in the East German Republic, after a short period of being banned, it became a state-driven communist anti-religious movement. In the 1850s, a group disenchanted by the church and its excesses decided to educate the next generation in a liberal, undogmatic way, said Newman. The church hoped that more people would go back to the church after the reunification, but that didn't happen. In fact, more people left. The church continues to lose believers, a trend attributed to the church tax deducted from a person's annual income. So that's a little bit about the secular ritual that they have sort of dusted off and reinstituted here in Germany. And I'm personally of the opinion that rituals are a very important part of our human process, whether it be putting on the gowns, the cap and gown, and going through graduation, or going to a place with friends and declaring your love for each other in public, or the naming of a child, or the speaking at a funeral. I think rituals connect us as human beings to practices that human beings have always engaged in. So I think, for me, I know some people don't find rituals very meaningful, but I personally do. So I wanted to get your thoughts on this notion of having a secular confirmation process in your countries. Xander, why don't we start with you, since you've been the most quiet. I'm going to pick on you.
I think it's quite interesting because atheism has never really had that sort of bonding system that religious groups do. I was about to say religiously as a pun, but you know what I mean. Like, I think it's a very interesting way of sort of connecting under a certain banner, or at the very least, educating oneself, which is perhaps more important than anything else.
Please continue. I don't want to rush you. Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, I'm just still trying to process it a little bit. I just wish I knew. I'm going to look up a bit more about the actual process itself, if I can.
Yeah. Matthew has helpfully put links in the chat box, so if you click on the blue box, not you guys viewers, 13 viewers, you can't see all this. But the chat box, there are links there. Matthew, what are your thoughts on it?
It's interesting. I never heard of such a thing, although this gets back to the line of reasoning about atheists having their own kind of community, because those who are part of a church or denomination, some congregation, have the community, and it's amazing how powerful that community can be. I think I mentioned before that there is a local megachurch that I've been to services. I will say in the line of duty, because I do their networking for them. And even if I'm just in one service for a purpose that has nothing to do with the service itself, I can still sort of, it's this odd feeling of how together they feel. Mm-hmm. Watching them sing, watching them have the sermon and all the other ceremony that goes around one of the services is an amazing thing. I didn't have any of these traditional things when I was growing up, so I'm more like Kristi, where I don't see tradition as important, which means, going back to our first article, I can get rid of 6,000 years of tradition. I don't care about it. But I can see for people who may have become atheists where such a thing could be helpful to them. I guess in the United States, this isn't such a big deal. We don't have, I mean, now, if you're Jewish, you've got bar mitzvahs, bat mitzvahs. If you're in Latin America, you got the quinceañeras and a few other things. There isn't, I don't know if there's anything else, maybe Tom and Kristi can correct me, of sort of coming of age ceremonies. I can understand how Catholic confirmation fits in there, and some other things, but So I don't know if this is important here. I've heard of friends in other nations who have children. They do things like debutante balls and other stuff, which is their coming of age. So I don't know what we have here in the United States for such a thing like that.
Yeah, Tom, do you want to go ahead?
Yeah, I can't think of much. I'm reminded of him and Metta talked about that. In a talk he gave at a conference in the last few months about how useful it can be for many people to have a secular, system of ceremony or mutual support or things like that. That sort of replaces the social aspects of church, and I think there's some value in that. I was looking up Rick Warren for Steve Shive's Atheist Reads about his book, and the church there is. It's less about the actual service, and it's more about all the small groups and the children's programs and the small groups programs, the community that's built up around the church, and I can see how that would be very attractive, and how there's not a lot of that in atheism, and I'm wondering now, as I think about it, I'm wondering. We do have Sunday assemblies and things like that. There's a fairly strong program of that in Britain, I understand, or has been anyway. And I know that there is some in America, but I'm wondering, especially in our neck of the woods on YouTube, if some of the tribalism in the YouTube atheist community has got to do with that sort of need to belong. People all join together to pile on Steve Shives or on, Anita Sarkeesian or whatever, and there's a kind of a community there of people, of like-minded people, and I'm wondering if that taps into that need for community at all. It's not ceremony exactly, although it does have some ritualistic aspects to it when the monkeys start flinging their turds at people.
Yeah, to jump in on that, one of the things I've noticed about chat rooms that are being taken over by the sort of like the Thunderfront friends that I had the video on at the Reason Rally live stream, or I watched a Clinton live stream where they thought she was going to announce Tim Kaine, but she didn't, and a bunch of like Trump people jumped in, and they do this thing where they like press 1 to build the wall, and then a bunch of people will just enter in 1. It's kind of like count off how many people agree with me are in this room, press 1 for, deport all the Mexicans, and then same kind of thing. So yeah, it's very much a notion of community building and in-group versus out-group identification that's taking place in these people who say that atheism is in a community, which is kind of ironic because all of their behaviors exhibit the same kind of thing. Like, because Steve was blocking people, and well, of course, what they say is if you don't like this, when I was getting the wall of sexually explicit tweets that filled my Twitter notifications for over a day, I was told, oh, if you don't like it, just block them. And then, of course, if you block them, they turn around and say, you're denying me I feel entitled to be able to scream foul things at you. And so it's basically a double bind, where they have a reason to scream at you no matter what you do. And the point is to keep screaming at you until you shut up and go away. Mm-hmm. That's the real goal of their behavior.
Mm-hmm. I think despite the rugged individualists who claim that we don't need community, that we are a social being, we need some kind of community. And for most people, for a lot of people, it's actually getting a smaller number, as we've mentioned, that the church is that community for them. So atheists don't have the same kind of community unless maybe they have some kind of congregation, like Penn Sunday School, or go to Unitarian Universalist or something like that. So I can see how, especially in the YouTube community, where we don't physically know each other. I mean, obviously we've been chatting now for however many months, but we have yet to meet. So we don't quite have that same community. Obviously, we can still form friendships and whatnot. So I can see how it splinters out, as Tom mentioned, that, you know, each group gets their tribal attitude, each group has their pet peeve about other parts of the group. And as someone mentioned, even if we don't think of ourselves as a group, because everyone outside of the group thinks of us as a group, we're a group.
That was Steve
Steve
Shives and Philip Rose talking. I just watched their hangout, earlier today. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, by definition. Yeah.
I have a question, quick, on that, on Pete Rose. On the Rose Shives conversation, I've avoided that because I really am avoiding all the I Hate Steve videos up there. Is that safe to watch?
Yeah, so what they do in that video, it's actually going to be part 1 of 2, and what Philip Rose does is he's been on YouTube for longer, you know, he's like one of the old-timers. In other words,
Right.
He's been around for like a decade, you know, and what he does is he kind of does a very lovely it's a genealogy, if you want to be philosophical about it. He's giving a sort of genealogy of the atheist community on YouTube. So they talk about the initial community was in reaction to Christian content creators, and the community was sort of born into a world of dispute and debate and debunking and response videos, and that's framed, to go back to AIU's notion of how the past influences the present. The notion of atheism being built on confrontation was part of its initial formation and has continued ever since. I mean, it's gone off, some people now are taking it in different directions, but that remains a core of what people do, or, you know, on YouTube when it comes to YouTube atheism. And then he works his way like through, he talks a lot about Phil Mason and Phil Mason's role in the early atheist community, and I think at the end of the video they come up to the 2008 Reason Rally, where this is before Atheism Plus, so they haven't talked about Atheism Plus yet, but they did talk about the kind of split that happened at the 2008 Reason Rally, and how the vlogosphere, or the bloggers, try to get more connection between the YouTube community and the liberal side of the atheist blogosphere community. So yeah, it's really more of a history than anything else.
Okay.
What was that name, sorry?
Yeah, so that's on Steve Shives' channel, and it's his discussion with Philip Rose. He used to have a channel, I think it used to be called the Liberal Ogre. But if you go to Steve's channel, it's about 1 hour and 30 minutes, and I wish it would have gone on for 2.5 hours because I found it really enjoyable to listen to. That's nice, the tangents they get on, and it's a very nice, easy conversation. So yeah, 2 thumbs up. If I could like it twice, I would.
Thank you.
You sure Phil Rose is the Liberal Ogre?
Yeah, I think that was what his channel used to be called.
Okay, because he still does stuff under
then
Phil
maybe
Rose.
He's got 2. Yeah, maybe he's got 2 channels. I only was introduced to him through Steve, so I'm kind of like, yeah, I feel like I missed out one of the long-time creators, but yes, I'm still learning the YouTube community too. Okay,
because there is a shorter video out by Rose that that's the one I saw. Well, I saw both, you know, ads for both of them, or, you know, notifications for both of them, but okay, well,
I think he might have mirrored it on his channel.
Well, maybe only part of it, because there. I don't know. Actually, I don't know. I'm rambling, but like I say, I'm a little gun shy now about anything that has Steve, any atheist video that has Steve Shives in the
thumbnail.
The thumbnail, because they seem to love to kick him around, and I don't know why.
Well, again, I think it comes back to what Philip was talking about. Is, you know, first they sort of started out taking on the creationists, and they had natural science to do that. So they were able to use evidence-based arguments. And then he talks about how Phil Mason moved on to attacking Muslims and Islamic stuff. And then, of course, you get into Gamergate, and suddenly there was lots and lots of money to be made on obsessing over a woman who had an opinion about video games.
Right.
And then, you know, that's now kind of died down. It's not generating the same oomph and views, and that's, I think, you know, people started then looking for other things to criticize, and that's when they turned on feminism and progressive movements, and thinking that they could mock them in the same way. that they mocked creationists, but the fact is that, well, at least, the Armored Skeptic and Logic and other guys actually took the time to understand the science that debunks creationism. Instead of using actually good arguments, they just used logical fallacies and straw man to go after these unnamed Tumblr feminists. And I mean, other than Lacey Green and Feminist Frequency, I don't actually see them citing women or feminists on YouTube, that are saying things they disagree with, unless it's Steve Shives. And even when Armored Skeptic did that, as Garrett showed, it was a completely vacuous, like, oh really, was the sort of the depth of argument that accompanied his critique.
Yeah. First they came for the creationists, and I said nothing because I was not a creationist. Then they came, Yeah,
but to kind of get back and tie this to ritual, one of the things...
I'm sorry.
No, because it's actually a nice lead-in. It's a nice segue, because I think one of the reasons why, in the States particularly, there isn't that sort of attempt, there are only now being attempts made to create these social spaces or to introduce notions of ritual into secular life, is because until really the 1990s, most atheists, most self-identified atheists in the U.S. were a particular kind of person. They were disproportionately male, they were disproportionately white, they were disproportionately higher educated, and therefore they're the kinds of people who would be sort of best placed to not feel the need for those kinds of rituals being important, or for those kinds of social interactions, because they probably found fulfillment in other areas of their life. But when you start to bring more people into the group, and one of the interesting statistics I found when I did the sociology of atheism video was that, at least in the London assemblies that were visited by the sociology PhD student, 60% of the attendees were women and 40% were men. So this idea of socializing and community might be gendered, in that it might be women who find it more important, although there are also men who find it important. And it might be the case that in terms of being sort of like, atheist cats out there on their own, not really part of a herd, that men are more likely to have those views than women. And so there might just be a gendered aspect in terms of socialization or other experiences that lead to those patterns. And so now that we are getting, we're getting more women into the atheist community, we're getting more people who come from non-white backgrounds, we're getting people who don't have a college education, so they might not have experience with the ideas and the language to sort of express what they're trying to say. So they might, feel like it's more important to have a sense of community and talk these things out with people, because they didn't have the benefit of having that time at university, and they have all these ideas running through their head, and it might be really helpful for them to be in part of a community. But then there are, I think, basically like the old school types who say, look, I'm an atheist, I'm an island, I don't need anything, and any of you who do, because that is like religion, you're weak. Or that's too much like religion for me, rather than saying, which is what my view of it is, that ritual is a humanist practice. It's a humanist practice, like I said, in just sort of common events in human life, whether that's birth or relationships or coming of age, where societies have independently recognized these stages and created something about them to make it feel like you're walking through a doorway to formally bring a person into adulthood, or to formally welcome a child into a community. That gives us a social meaning, as Matthew was pointing out. If you look at Adler and the steps of self-actualization, being a member of a community is part of that process, or part of the hierarchy of needs. So I think it's now, because we are in a point where we're getting a critical mass of people who are not religiously identified or openly atheists, that these issues are now becoming more pressing, and there are also people who are resisting it because they don't want to see changes to what they associate as being what atheism is. That would be my speculation. Drop the mic. Nobody has anything to say.
No, I agree.
When everyone agrees with you, there's nothing else that needs to be said.
Oh, right. Well, then, great. Then I think, because I have another Hangout coming up, which I guess I might as well plug to the 11 viewers who are watching live, at 8 o'clock my time, so in about 90 minutes, I'm going to be doing another live Hangout, this time with the makers of, well, the people who are trying to raise money to do a documentary on male domestic abuse. And they've been featured, I think, on Captain McCool's channel, And I actually meant to mirror that video when it came out, and life happened, so I'm really happy to have the opportunity to have those people on. So if you want to check back in about 90 minutes, you get to see me talk about a completely different topic with completely different people. But as always, it's been a really fun time here with Xander, Matthew, and Tom. And I want to thank them for coming to the Hangout, and also for bringing their views and their expertise and their opinions onto this. So I'm going to give you guys a chance on 1, 2, 3 to say goodbye. So on the count of 3, everyone say goodbye to the viewers. 1, 2, 3.
Bye, viewers.
Yeah, and now for me, I've been Kristi. You guys have been awesome, and I will talk to you later. Thanks for watching, and I'll talk to you soon. Bye.